Hey everyone, welcome. And this is our panel on Black Lives Can't Matter Until Trans Lives Matter. And we have some really excellent people to speak on this topic and just have a discussion. This being the first panel of the entire event, I want to make sure I doubly welcome you to the event and just know that you're going to see some performances sometimes, you're going to hear some speeches and at other times, and you're going to hear some great conversations. And this is one of them. It's our very first panel of the Queer Black Town Hall. My name is Peppermint, and I am the moderator of this fabulous event. And we have some great folks with us today. The first person that we have is writer and advocate Tiq Milan, who uses he, him pronouns. Actually, I'm going to do that again. I'm just going to ask everyone their pronouns when I speak to you. That's probably more appropriate. So I'll take that again. I'm your moderator, Peppermint, and we have some great guests that I really can't wait for you to meet. You probably know most of them, you should, but in case you don't, we have a fabulous writer and activist, Tiq Milan.
Hey, how you doing? I'm Tiq Milan, pronouns he, him.
We have artist and entrepreneur, Basit.
Hi, I'm Basit. I use they, them pronouns.
And actress and top model, Isis King.
Hello, I'm Isis King. I use she, her pronouns.
And I should say my pronouns. I'm Peppermint and I use she, her pronouns. And so this is the panel on Black Lives Matter and Black Lives, do that again? Ooh, something just fell. I'm Peppermint, I use she, her pronouns. And this is the panel on Black Lives Can't Matter Until Black Trans Lives Matter. And it's really a panel on transness and intersectionality in general in the Black queer community. And so there's a lot that I want to get to. But first off, right off the bat, folks are seeing this a few days after we've had this conversation. But I would like to just hear one word to start. We're going to have a chance for many words, but just one word to start on how you're feeling in this very moment. I'll start. Exacerbated.
Ooh. I'll add on and say exhausted.
I'll add on to that and say overwhelmed.
I'm focused.
I like that. And so I think it's a good idea. It probably goes without saying, but it's probably worth acknowledging that all of these feelings, all of these words, these adjectives, are obviously very valid and essential. In a time like this, there's so many things going on, and we're going to try to make sure that we have a really specific focus in this conversation, but we're doing this in the context of 2020, the Trump campaign for re-election and the Trump administration, COVID-19, and everything that sort of that speaks to. And so all those topics are going to be valid. But right now we're focused on Black Lives Matter, queerness, the LGBTQIA community, transness, and intersectionality, be it racial, socioeconomic, and anything else. So that should set the stage, and y'all know what you're about to listen to. Thank you, Mitch. When we talk about intersectionality, I think it's really important that, the shortest definition is basically where two sort of issues can cross and intersect. Whether it's someone who's rich but lives in California might have a different experience of someone who's rich and lives in Nevada or Florida. And so that's just a really basic idea of how intersections can affect people's life and their perspective on things. And so I'd really like to know, obviously we all here identify as queer or a part of the LGBTQIA spectrum, and we all self-identify as Black, but I would like to know what other ways do you describe your intersectional identity?
So,
yes. Oh, 1 second.
Boom. Yes.
I'm going to ask that question again.
I was like, wait, self-identify, who in here?
So I know that we all identify as Black, and we obviously all identify as LGBTQIA plus. But I'd like to go a little bit further and hear about how you identify with your intersectionality. How does that fit with you when you talk about your intersectional identity? What does that mean, and what are some of the descriptors that you use?
Okay. I will take that. So I'm non-binary, and I'm also I consider myself to be gender fluid, but I also fall under the trans umbrella because I was told I was a specific gender at a certain age that I never really felt resonated with me, and so therefore, my gender is my own, and like my gender, my sexuality is my own. So I'm very pansexual as well, but I feel like I'm a pansexual because leaning more to the lesbian sides of things lately. and and I'm
I feel you.
also just like, giving you chocolate and all of the other things that you need. But yeah, that's my gender identity is non-binary, and I consider all of my identities to be quite fluid.
How about you, Isis?
Well, they say that Black women are the most disrespected women in this country. I am a Black woman. I am a trans Black woman, which I think falls even below being a Black woman. Also, I come from a low-income family, and although I have a name, it's still been really hard. And
Speak on
also
it.
because my family is low income, what I do have, I still have to help my family with, So, I wasn't planning on getting emotional, especially with such a simple question. But people see the blue check and they just assume everything is perfect. So, yeah, all of those.
Sure. Thanks, Isis. I really appreciate all your emotion around that. It's right now it's really hard, I think, for us with having intersectional experiences as Black people, as trans people, as queer people. And for me, I think it's important to say like intersectionality isn't just about your identifying points, but it's about how you experience the world.
Mm-hmm.
I experience the world as a Black man, as a trans man, also as someone who is identified as queer, and also as a father. So when I talk about my queer experience, it's less about like sexuality and attraction, but it's more about like the political framework in which I walk through the world with this openness, with this idea that everybody should have the space to be self-determined in who they are and how they look and how they love. That influences and colors how I walk through this world every single day. And then also my intersectional experience as a father. I have a 2-year-old daughter. So I'm always planning ahead for her. So it's become less about me. Honestly, it's become less about community and more about my focus is on my daughter. How do I create a world how do I leave this world better than how I came into it for the sake of my child? So those are my experiences around my intersectional identity.
Can I ask you a question on that, Tiq, before we move on?
Yeah.
In regards to being a parent and a father, is that, I would assume, but I don't, maybe I shouldn't, that just comes naturally with parenthood and with fatherhood. Do you think that that's a point that at which you can connect to other folks who are not a queer experience, are not Black, but being able to connect on an empathy level as a parent are you able to explain sort of not that you need to, but do you think that you have the ability to explain your intersectionality through the lens of parenthood when talking to someone else who's a parent who's not a part of those intersections?
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the ways in which that we're able to create progress and change is when we're able to create space where we say, you know what, you and I are having a shared experience here. I may be Black and I may be trans, but I'm a parent. And I know what it is when your child comes into this world, that love you have for that kid, whether they are biologically connected to you or not, is a love that you cannot even explain. Like you love them so much, it's scary. It really shifts you when you decide to become a parent, whether biologically or you decide to become a parent out of your love for having a child and having a family. So I think on that in that respect, I think that my story can connect with other people. And then once we get there, then let's talk about how, me being Black shifts things a little bit. Me being trans shifts things a little bit. And me being queer and a part of queer community since I was 14 years old shifts my worldview, but it doesn't make me less of a father, and it doesn't mean that we can't have a shared experience among people who don't share the same intersectional identities and experiences as us.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. I love that. Let's move on to the next question. How do you personally, each of you, connect to the Black Lives Matter movement? I know that I'm just going to be very real here. When I went to, it didn't take me 1 minute to speak out publicly, even before connecting sort of this energy that we have now to the Black Lives Matter movement, speaking out on all these injustices that we've seen about not only trans women, but also cis folks and, unarmed Black men specifically being killed or beaten or murdered by the police, or neighborhood watch. And it didn't take me long to speak out on that publicly, as I know each of you, it didn't take 1 second to do that. And it also I didn't hesitate to run outside of the house and go join whatever march I could, whatever protest I could, connect myself in any way without any hesitation, 100%, to any conversation that was going on around Blackness, Black Lives Matter, police brutality, and all the injustices that we suffer. And so my question is, before that, after running out of the house and getting into that, there was a moment in which I would pause and look around me and say, okay, is this a safe situation? I'm in the middle of this protest. There's 700 people or 20,000 people here. It's real. Most of these protests have been mixed in terms of, ethnic, racial makeup and things. But I'm in this group of, I want to see all these strong Black folks around me. But is somebody looking at me funny? Am I okay? Like, that thought crosses my head. And I don't know if I'm safe, should I speak louder, if I want to shout and let the feelings flow through me the way that they connect with my emotions. All of a sudden, are they like, what's that woman with that man's voice? Oh, not that would have been the first thing to spook me, but, I think all that stuff is in my mind. And then I'm like, weighing and feeling like I need to choose between two things. So can y'all talk to me on that, about how you connect to the Black Lives Matter movement specifically?
Yeah. So Black Lives Matter, before it was a big protest, before it was a big movement, it was a mantra that I had to say to survive at a very young age. So growing up a dark-skinned person in Texas, the ridicule that I would receive from not just white people, not just non-Black people, but also Black people, because colorism and because racism is so deeply embedded into our culture and deeply embedded to our society. I had to learn from when the first kid bullied me at the age of 5 for being dark-skinned, that I needed to tell myself, and I had to look towards my family and the people, my loved ones, to remind me that my life mattered, that my life was important, that my experiences are more than matter. They're beautiful, they're unique, they cultivate so much joy and so much good that it threatens other people into feeling that they needed to have some type of ownership over my life. And I am every day trying to continue that mantra, and it's kind of lovely to not lovely, but it's nice that people are now hip with the Black Lives Matter. But as a Black person, you don't really have a choice to support Black Lives Matter if you are trying to support your own life. I've found it to be incredibly difficult existing while being Black in almost all circumstances in this country, especially mainstream circumstances, because your livelihood depends on it. Your ability to get work, your ability to date, to find love, all of these things are rooted in your identity. And before I tell anybody I'm non-binary, before I tell anybody that I'm femme, before I tell anybody my sexuality, they see my skin. I don't get to tell anybody that. So it's a matter of survival when I think about it. And Black Lives Matter is a mantra that is meant to keep me alive and to keep reminding me and all Black people how important and valuable we are.
Wow. I think for me, it's a little bit different. Even when I talk to a lot of people that never had to, say, go inside of prisons and see the system, from maybe 2 years old to 21, I had to visit my father. Most of my memories of my father was behind jail. My father, my mom's ex-husband, my brother, my cousins, my uncles, most of my family is brown skin and dark skin, right? So when people, even recently, I got into it with a lady online and she said, well, your community, do you not know how light skinned people are made? And it was just like, I had to take a second to,
Oh, Lord, have mercy.
I had to take a second because I'm not trying to get sidetracked. People see it on light skin, but both my parents are Black. So I don't even have I can't even have a conversation about being mixed or being whatever because I'm Black. That's the only thing I know. Both my parents are Black. Neither one of my parents are anything else. But to go backwards, unlike a lot of people I know, I've been inside of prison to visit every single male, except for my little brother, every single male in my family. I had a cousin who they took to prison, dark skin. They took him to prison, and it was because he was just about to finish probation. But then they said, "Oh, they think he did something," and then they found out in court that the police actually lied. But because there was still a loophole in the timing where he got arrested, he still had to stay in prison. I don't remember how long it was, but it was just frustrating because my whole life, this is what I saw all around me. And as far as what Peppermint said about jumping out there, running right outside, I felt a little guilty. I can't lie. I felt a little guilty before I made a post about my feelings because I was afraid to go out there. I've always been afraid of big groups, but I was afraid to go out there. And I felt like, okay, you know what? Let me just use my voice from home and people might not understand, but at least let me get my point out there. So I remember making a post about wanting to protest with my Black brothers, but being afraid to protest with my Black brothers.
I remember seeing it.
And I feel like it was actually the first time that the people actually understood, which is weird because I'm so used to it doesn't matter. Even still, you saw people that say, well, put your feelings to the back burner. We'll worry about that later. And it's just like, when is later for us? When is later for Black trans women? There is no later. And people cannot understand how just because you're the same color don't mean that you're not still oppressing each other the way that they are oppressing us. And it's been a conflict for me, honestly, because I know how it is from being a little kid, having to go to prison and seeing these police having to pat you down from being a little kid. So I know how scary that shit feels on a different level than a lot of people might not know. But I have been discredited because I'm light skinned, which is a whole nother conversation.
Well, talk on it. Please talk to us about it.
Because I grew up in Maryland, right? So I grew up in an all-Black school where the minority was maybe a few white kids, a few Asian kids. So I know that colorism is real, but I personally never saw it in my face. My mom and my aunt told me they have the same mother and father, but my mom is lighter than my aunt. So I know all about colorism, and I cannot discredit colorism because that shit is real. We can see it in music. We can see it in promotions. We can see it in every single aspect. But for me, because I grew up with an all-Black family, or all dark-skinned family, I was actually teased for being a light-skinned one everywhere I went. So I always had a complex about being light-skinned. So for me, I can never just speak on that experience. And who's to say that I didn't get something because my skin was lighter? But I know recently, and I know that I have just as many struggles recently with work, with booking something and then saying, "Oh, actually, we love your talent, but you're just too light for this role." So it's like, it's just weird, and all of this is going on that now I'm being discredited. you know, for my skin color. So that is just like, it's
I
weird.
want to touch on colorism just because I didn't want to bring it up
No,
to
no, 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 no,
say
no,
that,
no,
like,
no.
you
That
know,
that wasn't,
but
that
I
was not to you, because
totally.
what you experience is, that's the majority.
Well, and I want to validate both of our experiences, right? Because at the end of the day, colorism is a mechanism, a tool that was used to divide our community. But at the end of the day, when you shake it down, we're black. And people are going to use the fact that we are black as a tool to disenfranchise us, as a tool to like assert racist politics. So I don't want to. I want to acknowledge colorism as a very definitive tool that has been used to divide Black people within the race and divide all. I mean, people of all skin tones. It's the darker you are, the more susceptible you are to racism. The more you are aligning yourself with Blackness, the more like the world and societies have tried to, what's the word? Assert injustices. I don't know what else to say.
Yeah.
So I think that, you know, one thing that I do want to acknowledge about colorism is that like it's real, but Black people are being murdered and Black people are being not treated as a whole human being, regardless of what shade you are. It's the Blackness that is being targeted.
Well, I think one of the things, and Tiq, I want to hear you. I obviously want to hear your thing, and I'm going to really jump in really quickly. But one of the things that I've experienced as someone who works as a drag queen is a lot of times it's about the expectation of the Blackness that comes with what box they want you to fit into, and they're like, oh, we want a black, somebody who's really dark skinned or somebody who's really light skinned, so that they being the casting directors, the people that are hiring you, the people in industry, have the ability to, sorry, um, have the ability to sort of, as a means to control us. And, you know, I think one of the answers to that is just showing them a diverse range of what Blackness means. I guess basically what I'm saying is whoever's using colorism outside of the Black community, people that are in industry, people that have the ability to hire or fire us, whoever's using our color against us has a really narrow view of what it means to be Black. And I think that the first response to that needs to be more diversity in, like, all, folks of all different shades, and all different types of, all shades, all genders, and all sort of iterations of Blackness, whether I'm goth, whether I'm into hip hop, whether I'm a business person, whether I'm a whoever, showing all these different faces of Blackness, basically. But T, I want to hear what you have to say about how you connect to the BLM movement and colorism, if you like.
Sure. So first, I just wanted to touch on one thing that Isis said, just about being fearful of being outside and protesting. You know, for folks who are watching this, just for people to know that it's okay. You know, because, you know, to be able to be outside, there's a privilege there. There's a privilege of safety, and there's a privilege of autonomy, and a privilege of ability in your body. Everybody can't go out there. So if you can't go out there and protest, there are other ways in which you can be involved, and your voice can be heard, and your voice isn't any less valid because you are not in the streets. So I just wanted to say that. Secondly, when it comes to the Black Lives Matter movement, for me, it's less about my connection to it, but its connection to us. So when Black Lives Matter when it first in its inception in 2013, it was around the murder of Trayvon Martin. We're very focused on that case, very focused on that kid. This time around, this global Black Lives Matter movement has come when we are under like this huge thick of a global pandemic. There's so much uncertainty. The racism in our systems have been called to the forefront because of the disparities, where Black people, I think, are dying at 5 times the rate of white people when it comes to COVID-19, and it's ripping through Black communities, right? Ripping through Black trans communities. So we have that, and then on top of it, we all had to sit and watch a 9-minute video of this man having his life squeezed out of him while he called for his mother. Okay, and then we have the president, who was a buffoon, who was talking about when the looting starts, the shooting starts, dog whistling to his really white supremacist base. So there's just all of these things that are happening at one moment, which I think has caused this eruption of this global Black Lives Matters movement. But the thing is right now, the global Black Lives Matters movement, what it is looking at is looking at the systems that have been violent against people of color. So there's a reckoning here. This is why there's so many white people out in the streets. The reason that this movement right now is different is because of white folks who are not, who some of them are performing their allyship, and that's a whole nother conversation on the performativeness of allyship, right? But they're also out there actually having conversations about white supremacy in our systems. People are actually talking about defunding the police on TV. Like, these are like radical conversations that we have been having in our circles for decades, and people are actually having these conversations because there is a cultural reckoning that is happening, right? And so with that, so the cultural reckoning has to come from these white supremacist systems, from our, you know, our criminal justice systems, but also we're going to have to look at ourselves too as Black people. And there's going to have to be a reckoning here. Because if we're going to talk about Black Lives Matter, then every last one of our lives has to matter. It's going to be all of us, or it's going to be none of us. So if you're going to have all of this rage and all of this organizing around the death of George Floyd, then you need to have as much rage around the beating of Ayanna Dior, around the death of Tony McDade, around the death of Nina Pop, around the death of all of these Black trans women who are oftentimes losing their lives at the hands of the men who are supposed to love them. Right? So there's a reckoning that has to happen culturally within our community. And I think what's happening now with the expansiveness of this movement, that is making space for us to say this. And I've said this here, and I did another panel the other day, and I wrote an article about it. It's all of us or none of us. This is not the time for trans people to be silent in the movement for Black lives. We're going to have to make some space. Expanding is not erasure. We're going to have to make some space. Black people who we love so much. It's so oftentimes that Black trans people and Black LGBT people are at the forefront of organizing these movements for the lives of oftentimes Black straight men who lose their lives, but they don't come for us. They don't show up for us. Those days are done. You're going to show up for us right now. So it's going to be all of us or none of us. So right now, this relationship to Black Lives Matter, for me, it means opening it up a little bit. So not just looking at the lives that people think is more valuable than other people, that of men, that of straight people, you know what I'm saying, or that of binary people, but that of all of us, and understanding that our Black experience isn't a monolithic one, and one experience isn't better than any other. So making space for all of our Black experience so that we can show up for each other and be better together.
So I want to talk a little bit on that. Let's pause before the next subject. All right. So the next question is, so I think that's a really good.
I already said my part.
Yeah, for anybody that wants to jump in a little bit more, like, how is your Blackness supported or not supported by the Black community? And I know that's kind of a sweeping statement by individuals in the Black community, and this can be sort of positive experiences that you've had, or experiences, excuse me, or experiences where it hasn't been supported. Can we speak on that a little bit?
Is it the queer community or the Black community?
What does it say, Rafe? I can't see.
Blackness.
This is the Black community. We're going to talk about the queer community in a second.
Okay, Q. So I think that within the Black community, it's also difficult for me to speak on the work that needs to be done in the Black community, and I respect what Tiq said so much. But I can't help but think about how much trauma Black people have experienced from like their whole lives, and like in terms of just like the way that we have been made to believe like how social caste systems work within society, right? I then again also don't want to give any excuses to people who have like caused so much trauma to the queer community and also have done so much violence to Black people, right? Black trans people and Black queer people. So I have mixed feelings. It's a mixed bag. I think that, the ways that I've experienced a lot of prejudice within the community has stemmed a lot from just like how outwardly femme I am, and how that doesn't align with how appearingly male I am. There is, this rhetoric that's passed down in a lot of Black families that is like, there's only one way to be a man, there's only one way to be a woman, and if you don't abide by those ways, then you are a threat to Blackness and the advancement of Black people. And that myth has to be debunked, because not only is it just not true, but it's dangerous. And it's putting so many of our Black lives into danger. And I don't even think Black people realize how dangerous making someone feel as if they can't live and exist in their body the way that they're meant to is causing so many of our lives to not be valued, not just within the Black community, but across all communities.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Isis.
No, go ahead, Tiq.
Okay. I just, and thinking about what you said, just as someone who is feminine or gender nonconforming within Black community, I think that's the thing right there, right? It's just how we don't value femininity and how people don't understand gender nonconforming people. For me, as a masculine binary man in Black community or any community, I don't really have an issue. You know, since my transness isn't like readily available for folks, and people read me and they are comfortable with my masculinity and they value that over femininity, I don't necessarily have to deal with a lot of things. But at the same time, it's like a lot of things around like violence or being invalidated and things like that, right? But at the same time, that's a huge issue. This is an issue talking about like patriarchy and sexism, how we don't value feminine people and only look at femininity or non-conforming people as something that's just a performance and not something that like actually is, right? And then also for me growing up, I grew up in a fairly liberal household, and not real religious folks. My mother was like, church, I could take it or leave it. My father was like, I don't know about this church thing. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, because there wasn't the religiosity of it, there was a lot more space for me to just be. And I think that's one thing that we see in Black community. And the thing is, that's
the point.
Let's be like really careful about not pathologizing Black people and like not pathologizing our culture or our communities. But under like Christianity and religion, that has a huge stronghold on folks. Black and white alike, awful. You people who are super, super Christian are usually like awful when it comes to like LGBT issues, right? So I think that there's a conversation to have around like how we allow like religion to create space for people to judge us, right? People get too caught up in the religion and don't give a I don't know.
Sorry. That was me. Hold on one second.
I hope you guys keep that part in there. That was pretty funny. It was like such a serious moment, and then you just
kaboom.
Like falling.
Go ahead. Religion.
I would say religion. I think too oftentimes what we see in communities, folks are using religion to justify the bigotry instead of really like turning towards actually like the spirituality and the divinity of God and all things like that. So.
Does anybody have experience with a connection to religion in their life or an example of how that has? Go ahead. Basit.
I do, and it's so funny because like I grew up in the church. I grew up in the Baptist church, and I think that I'm a very, very spiritual person, and I have always been. But I absolutely experienced some of the most the most traumatic hatred coming from the church community a lot of the times because I used my voice. I was able to find a spiritual connection in the church by getting to sing and getting to experience seeing my elders and my other Black community getting to have some type of spiritual revelation that we weren't having on the streets every day. But then I watched those same elders and some of that youth turn their back on me as soon as they saw anything in me that was remotely queer or was anything that contradicted cis heteronormativity. I find it that religion, not spirituality, but religion has been used as a tool to control, as a tool to manipulate societies since the beginning of time. And I have my grapples with religion oftentimes because what religion at its core is supposed to do is remind and teach people how to love, but what it inherently does is the exact opposite oftentimes. And so, yeah, I think that's very real. What Tiq is touching on is that like the systems, there are so many levels to these systems that we're talking about that we are trying to dismantle, right? Religion is a big structure in these systems. I mean, look at Donald Trump. He's using religion, oftentimes holding up Bibles that he's never read to...
It's so obvious.
I think I think for me, it's I always say I'm more spiritual, and even that's something I feel like you have to battle with, because as soon as you mention anything, people say they're trying to push their agenda. I'm like, y'all sound just like Trump people in our community when we speak up for ourselves, and you say we're trying to push the gay or LGBT agenda. Just because we say, well, I could be spiritual, I could be religious, I could be all these things you are, but instead of focusing on treating me like an equal, like all the books say you're supposed to do, you're trying to use it against me. I remember one time, uh, it was after like I was on Top Model, like I was already a public figure, I already had my surgeries. I went back home to visit my family, and my pastor was there, and he was always such an amazing guy. He came over to the house. We were all really close. And he said, before you go back up to New York, I want to pray for you. I'm like, oh, thank you, Pastor. Like that's so yes, pray for
Oh
me.
no.
He started praying, and he said, Father God, please protect my son, Father God. And I'm like, wait a second. No, you didn't. Number one, everything's already changed, name, body part. Like what? Like, why do you have to, instead of focusing on how good of a person you think and that I am, you want to focus on something that literally has nothing to do with you. And it really just put a bad taste in my mouth, not for my spirituality and the connection I have with my higher being, God. And now I like to start saying the goddess, because, it's the whole thing. And I had to realize that my own thing was separate. It was separate from what people believe it should be. And most of the people don't even think, because we live our true authentic selves, that we should even have a connection to religion or spirituality, which is the biggest crock of bullshit in itself.
Right, and it is a big crock of bullshit, because this is the thing: for us to be able to be self-determined in who we are and to live our most authentic life is for us to be like spiritual. That's like if you're into like religion or God or astrology, anything, what the universe and God and divinity wants is for us to be our best selves. So
yes.
Transitioning and saying like, I came in this world one way, but I'm saying I'm going to be this way is to ascend to a higher spiritual place. And that's the thing, like people really got it twisted. People use like religion to put people in boxes. Spirituality is what kind of makes you free. Being queer and being trans is what makes you free. And bringing that back into like the conversation around Black Lives Matter movement, like movement towards justice is a spiritual movement. It is a spiritual practice. It's a practice that Jesus was involved in. It's a practice that Allah was involved in. So this idea of moving towards justice and equality and something that is equitable for the world is to be of the divine spirit in this world. So don't let these people
and it's universal.
So don't let these people tell you because you're queer or you're trans that you don't get to have a relationship with God. My relationship with God has gotten better since I became me.
Yes.
That's the truth. So I want to talk a little bit about how the queer community, kind of the same question. How has the queer community supported or not supported your Blackness?
I've been grappling with this for a while now, because we kind of touched on allyship and performative allyship. And I've been having a very difficult time staying engaged with my own social media, because there is this idea that all of these white people are hearing these concepts of race and racial injustice for the first time. And I just happen to know that that is a complete lie. Like, I've spent so much of my life telling these people, looking them in the eyes, being like, when Trayvon Martin, when Mike Brown, like all of these people, I was in undergrad when, the first Black Lives Matter movement was going on. And I said, like, let's just look at the facts here. And had so many of these same white people who are performing their allyship now telling me then, like, well, maybe he shouldn't have been stealing cigarettes, or coming up with all of these justifications for why this Black life didn't matter and why Trayvon's Black life didn't matter because he had on a hoodie. Like, I get so frustrated because there was so much labor that I was putting in while also experiencing trauma, but because my Black body was in danger. And I was putting in labor trying to educate these people, and it seems that now, there's this, I don't want to call it trendiness because I really pray and hope that it's not, but there's this trendiness of performative allyship trying to convince me now that they're hearing what I was saying then, and I don't believe it because the microaggressions are still there, right? There's so much microaggression in the idea that all of a sudden you can post in your story, Black Lives Matter, but like you still haven't apologized to me for all of the racism that you inflicted on my life. And you haven't even addressed like the lack of Black people that you're hiring or the lack of Black people that you are giving opportunities to advance in society. You're only going to address it from this like film layer, and you're not actually going to like penetrate deep within the surface to actually dismantle the system. I'm not buying it.
I want to take that even a step further, because there are people who have, I've gotten plenty of calls from my white queer friends calling me, apologizing to me, and, you know, and it's like, to me, I'm not really interested in what you have to call and apologize to me. Like, call your family, call your mom, call the people in your life. Like, let's look at how you connect to this system of racism, and let's see you do that work that really is between y'all. This work of being an ally and activism, especially online, is not really about you going around and checking on your Black friends to make sure they're okay. No, we're not. We're not okay. We will be okay when you talk to the white people who don't hear us. I think that's the bigger part of it.
Yeah,
it's a huge part. It's a huge part. Go ahead. Sorry.
You're right. It's a huge part. And I always say this, you know, your guilt is never useful. Only your solidarity is. I don't have time for you feeling guilty about being white or about being men or about being straight or being rich. Figure it out. Figure out how you can put that privilege on the line and be in solidarity with people who are not like you. And so back to the original question of my Blackness and queer community, for me on a personal level, over the years, decades that I've been in community, I have been really, really intentional about curating a community around me of people who are of like minds. So I'm gonna be really honest. I don't, there are a whole lot of white queers that I like vibe with on a personal level, but the ones that I do have done the work or are doing the work. Who have been into like understanding like what it means to be white, like what their whiteness looks like and what privilege looks like and how they can be better before this moment in time. So, now, I mean, I give kudos to the white folks who are showing up right now, who are starting to think about these things. But there is a slippery slope between like this performativeness of being an ally and actually being in solidarity. So I see those two things happen. But for me personally, in my personal life, I don't have white folks that are performing a bunch of BS in my life. Secondly, and I won't.
God bless you.
I have had to cut someone off, and who just came back around and start apologizing again, just to post that she's marching for me.
Oh, girl, keep your apology. Girl, keep your apology. Figure out.
Don't march for me. March for Black lives. Like.
Okay, something.
Performative.
Like, that's the thing. It's all performance. You want to get out here. You want to get out here and you want to march and you want to do these art projects. All of that is great. Okay?
It was the art. It was a whole collage with a picture of me. I'm like, girl, we have not talked in a year.
You for real?
Just to make it seem like just so you can call out other white people, so you could be like the savior for your girl.
Can we show the art project? Here's the art project. Here's the picture that she's talking about.
No, because she's a public figure too. So I've been doing really good by not sharing that story because.
Okay, so we won't show it. Okay, so we'll have to edit that out. Sorry, Mitch.
But yeah, so much of performative, the art projects and Melcher and I am grateful for that. But the thing is, the hard work happens after that. When this moment is gone, there's going to be hard work to have to go talk about policy changes, having really, really difficult conversations. Like that's what I expect for white folks who want to be in solidarity with us. Professionally, as being a Black man in queer community who has been like professionally queer for the last 20 years, I've worked at several different organizations who really did not have the time or day for Black trans people or Black trans issues until very, very recently. You know what I'm saying? So I've seen that work in community. I've seen how, queer white folks can really fall back on their whiteness instead of really stepping up and honoring that the change that they need to be. but it happens. But I think for all of us, I think it's important for us to really be intentional about the relationships that we curate with folks in queer community and outside of queer community, so that we can stay healthy and that we can stay loved and validated, and not have to be pit up against people who are supposed to be our friends, who are supposed to care about us. Like, I don't, if you love me, you down for me, I shouldn't have to explain myself to you. Like, let's just like together.
I think,
and I want to clarify.
I think I just want to say really quickly, if you guys all, I know we all know who Monroe Bergdorf is, but to see what she just went through with L'Oreal, to hold them accountable now after they tried to say Black Lives Matter 3 years after eliminating her from a campaign just because she spoke up about racism. And it's like, no, we're at a whole different place now. They might not have listened then, but they're listening now. And I'm going to hold you accountable. And they end up putting her on the board, and that was such a big move. But I think it just goes to show where we are now, because now our voices are more impactful, and we're not saying anything different than we weren't saying 3 years ago, 4 years ago, 2 years ago, 5 years ago. And I think that part of it is performative, but nonetheless, our voices are way more impactful now, and it is important to speak up, because we do have a lot more people who are allies, who are really going to do the work. And for the ones who aren't, hold their asses accountable in a public space so they don't have a choice.
Well, speaking about a public space, it's go ahead.
I just wanted to say that I was not interested. I'm not interested in any white guilt, but I am very interested in accountability. And I think that I was so glad that you said what you said about accountability, Isis, because accountability goes a lot further than guilt, especially white guilt. Your white guilt's not useful, but you're being accountable for your ways that you have been implicit to a system of racism. That goes for Black and brown and white people. Hold yourself accountable for your transphobia, for your sexism. Like, all of it is the only way to actually move change. We're not going to dismantle systems if no one's being accountable for the ways that we are doing things wrong.
Well, I think one thing is that people are really having a hard time figuring out what that is, what those tools are, and how to do it. And I think a lot of Black folks are trying to figure out, how do we teach them, how do we guide them, because there's so much on the line, or do we leave it up to them? Because we know if we leave it up to the white folks to figure out racism, we might end up back in slaves. I mean, just to be for real. But I do want to talk about one of the things that's taken a public sort of stage right now is the conversation publicly between queer-led organizations and Black-led organizations specifically. Just keep in mind that this is happening a week later than when it's really happening. So last week, there was the Black Lives Matter conversation between CSW, Christopher Street West, the Pride organization in LA, having a march for Pride and then turning it to a Black Lives Matter focused protest. And then also in New York, the same thing happened on the 14th of June last week. And so there's this conversation happening publicly. And I know that on the calendar, it was COVID canceled Pride, and then Black Lives Matter changed Pride into something that was more focused on Blackness. And now there's kind of a struggle, it seems like, between a Black Lives Matter protest happening, or should it be a Pride protest happening, or what that looks like. And so I just want to know, what your thoughts are on that. Let's talk about it.
Sure. I went down to the protest down at Stonewall. I think that was last week, and talking about Tony McDade, talking about Nina Pop. It was the protest and the rally was really good. There was tens of thousands of people. It was just thousands and thousands of people. It was peaceful, and I think that the reason it was so peaceful and the energy was kind of cool was because there was no police. There was no police presence at all. Police presence is what heightens things. Police presence is, you know what I'm saying? They are the agitators. So there was no police there, which is really good. But the thing that Stonewall protest was happening, but there was another protest happening at the same time for George Floyd and the bigger kind of movement. And so for me, that was a little bit disheartening, because it's why are we having a separate kind of protest, a separate kind of march here, which was mostly queer people. So tens of thousands of people. It was mostly queer people. Lots of folks like from the neighborhood, like in the West Village. What I would have really had liked to see was more folks who I would have liked to see like more like Black cis het allies at the march for Nina Pop and Tony McDade and for Black lives in general. But that's something that stood out to me, that we were having two separate things happening at the same time, and just wondering about what that disconnect.
Mm-hmm.
The disconnect is obvious. All I want to say is they don't really care about us.
Well, there's a big disconnect happening right now, and I want to only touch on this really, really quickly because we're running a little short on time. J.K. Rowling, what the hell? Speak on it.
I mean,
ciao. That's how we want to spend the rest of our time talking about this.
No, we're gonna touch on it. We're gonna go in and out. But some
in and out like Harry Potter on his broom, honey.
Yeah, okay, let us know.
J.K. Rowling is just another example of someone who has not been held accountable, but has instead chosen to let their privilege mask them from the realities of the world that we are.
What realities?
Living in, or any reality at this point. The reality of like trans people and trans existence. I think that there is a thing that happens with a lot of white feminists, also known as TERFs, that
not all white feminists necessarily.
Not some white feminists that are also known as TERFs.
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily. Thank you, Peppermint, for that clarification. That there is this idea that the female plight is different than the trans woman plight. And that is, again, false. And it's so disheartening to know that somebody writes in their literature about accepting who you are and moving through your adversity to come into your higher self, and yet in their privilege can't give that same courtesy to trans people. Wow. There's such a lack of accountability, and the fact that she's been out here saying transphobic things for years, but the fact that she's doubling down in a time where trans Black women are being massacred and there's a genocide on Black people, it seems, and specifically trans Black people. The fact that she doubled down in this time says to me all that I need to know about her morals and her values and whose life matters to her.
Yeah. So, J. Karen Rowling, she's caring.
Karen.
She's such a Karen right now with this moment with trans people. She's been like this for a long time. You're absolutely right. But here's the thing. This is like really like quintessential like white feminism, right? Where they.
What's wrong?
What is that noise?
Oh, that's people calling me. I'm sorry.
Oh.
That's Monet Exchange calling me. Mitch, can you text all the people and tell them no calling? Go ahead.
So the issue, J.K. Rowling is kind of this quintessential white feminist, right? Well, a lot of these white feminists, what they don't understand is they think that expanding the idea of what the experience of femininity and womanhood is taking away space from them. And this is what I said on Twitter: expanding is not an erasure. And the thing is this really calls into some like really like white supremacist kind of like patriarchal kind of thinking, because like white supremacy and patriarchy tells you that you have to like center white people, you have to center men in order for things to be valid. And that's what she's doing. She's saying if we're not centering the experiences of people who are assigned female at birth and who identify as women and are feminine people, then we are invalidating their experiences completely. And that is not the case at all.
You're saying center, CENTER, not censored.
No, censor, yeah. So we're centering the experiences of white cis women, and when we don't do that, that means that they don't exist. But that is not that's not true. Just because you have to create more space for people doesn't mean that you're not allowed to exist. So then it's like calling into question. So she really needs to do some soul searching. Like if you are defining yourself by how you are not somebody else, then maybe you should start redefining who you are. There's never been a trans woman that has telling her story and is saying, well, now that this trans woman's told her story, now you don't have any space to tell your story as a cisgender woman. And I want to push push back on the last comment, on Basit's last comment. I think that cisgender women or people who and people who are assigned female at birth and trans women all have different experiences.
They do.
The experiences of cis women is not the same as that of a trans woman, but that doesn't mean that one is better than the other, and they all should have the space to be told, and they all have the space to have our empathy and our compassion and whatever it is that we need behind it. But we have to mix all of it.
Yeah, but it's also, for me, I'm just trying to make the clarity of women is women, and I think that, like, why are we so focused on, and it brings up a bigger question for me about white fragility, right? Because I'm not trying to coddle white people into caring for my life.
Right.
I'm not gonna, you know what, Peppermint, you did correct me a second ago about not all white feminists, but I'm gonna double down and say I don't care about coddling feelings of people who do not realize that it's our lives that are at stake. I don't care about how many more books that J.K. Rowling sells when another Black trans woman is dead. Yep. So why are we coddling their feelings? I am gonna say that women are women and we respect all women, and if you're a real feminist, you will care and respect all women. And I will also say that if you are a white feminist, the word white right there is saying that your politics is focusing on one type of feminism. And I need you to be a inclusionary, intersectional feminist. So yes, white feminist, TERFs, whatever you are, I need you to be better. I need you to care about Black lives. And I don't want to make any more excuses. And I'm not going to hold your hand through racism anymore because we are dying. High stakes.
Well, I think at the end of the day, what we're talking about here is that, like Tiq said, the whiteness is centered before anything else, whether it's feminism or transness or anything. And I think that's really the biggest takeaway for me with J.K. Rowling. It's not all this talk has nothing to do really, although it's extremely, there's a dangerous effect to trans people and the conversation of trans lives and that conversation. To me, this conversation that J.K. Rowling is conducting speaks more about her relationship to white supremacy than it does about feminism. She seems to be unassuming and just saying her speech about, protecting womanhood, whatever that is, whatever that means, however that's coming across. But it really is mostly speaking, it sounds like the words that only a white woman could be speaking in this moment in time right now, when we're all talking about Black Lives Matter. Only a white woman can get up and talk about, trans women, girl, weak by.
And I wanna say one more thing, like between her and between women in general, or people in general, always trying to discredit trans people. And then you have the president trying to take away our health care. I feel like our lives do not revolve around trying to prove who we are to people.
No.
Like, we're trying to survive out here. And it's fucking annoying to even have to continue to have a conversation saying, well, let me tell you, from now on, if you don't even want to hear, I'm not going to share. Because I have bigger things to worry about. I have people to worry about. We want to survive. We're not here to just tell you. We're not here to trick you. We're not here to just continuously try to prove who we are. If we tell you this is who we are, that's it. Period. Next topic. Let's keep going.
Yeah, well, let's get to the next topic. I want to know how the Black Lives Matter movement can acknowledge our existence. Specifically, how can we, if we could speak to folks at the, I want to be very clear, there is a difference between people that are purporting and supporting the Black Lives Matter movement and Black Lives Matter, just using the hashtag, and folks that are directly connected with the actual organization Black Lives Matter. So if we could speak to the people that are just really connected to the Black Lives Matter movement, what would we want to say to them? How can they support transness?
I would say just really
and queerness.
Quickly, I would say really quickly, take the terms out, take trans out, and put racist and put Black in there where we are. I think that if you let them know that by not supporting us, by thinking that we don't deserve the rights and the decent human courtesy that we're all supposed to be fighting for, that they are no better than the people that are trying to oppress us.
Mm-hmm.
They're the same exact way. And a lot of people want to discredit us and say that it's not the same. But I think it's just laying it down for them to really see that until you stand up for all Black lives, it's going to always be a division, and we need the support.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think it's more. I think it's like an organizational kind of like strategy around it. Because two of the founders of Black Lives Matter are queer identified people. Patrice Cullors and Alisa Garza are both queer folks. They started Black Lives Matter back in 2013, so they have an understanding of this intersectional approach. But what happens is you have this huge movement, and it's happening like in local kind of ways, like local pockets. So there has to be a way in which, it has to be a way in which like the ideas around all of our Black lives having merit and having value has to trickle down to like the local, the localized actions and the localized movements. You know what I'm saying? There has to be at some point the folks who are organizing Black Lives Matter movements and rallies and whatever on a local level, partnering with LGBT organizations who are also working with Black folks and being able to think how we can have a concerted effort so that we're bringing to the table all of the issues, all of the unique issues that are affecting Black people. Because again, we are not a monolithic experience, right? We all experience anti-Blackness, but it all touches us in very different ways. And so these organizations who are creating these movements and are organizing have to come together and start to think about how they can get aligned on their messaging and on their movement.
Take care of awesome.
Yeah, I think that there's a definite call for unity within the Black community. There's a call for unity within the Black Lives Matter movement, and I feel like they're doing a very, very good job of covering, like making sure that the Black Lives Matter is the statement that in which we're all supposed to take away from that. But it goes back to the same things we're talking about, like including trans people in their in their activism, in their organization, like making sure that there are Black trans people in these spaces also advocating for our lives and making sure they're elevating Black trans voices that are alive. We do way too much of like recognizing only Black trans people once they've been murdered. And that is way too late. The only way that we can actually save and cultivate our communities and cultivate these lives and give these lives a voice that can save our lives is by giving them the platform while they're alive to speak for our lives. And I also want to take this moment to say that like I am like in a deeply triggered state, just like all the time with all that's going on in this. And I think that we must also give Black people the space to not have to be engaging in these types of conversations all the time. So we have done a lot of talking about the work that needs to be done, right? The work that we can do as Black people to help our movement. But the work cannot start if we don't give ourselves the time and the space to like process and to grieve and to like experience the trauma. Like I'm like, let me be the therapist today and say that we need to be taking time for ourselves. Like even this conversation has brought up so much for me that I wasn't necessarily wanting to have to unpack on this here day. So
I'm sorry about that.
Take space. No, I mean, no, this has also been so helpful. You know what I mean? This has been such a great conversation, but I'm mostly concerned for my fellow Black people who think that there may not be something that they can do at this moment, that then you need to take that time for yourself because in this moment, your Black life matters.
And I think that's part of the question is like, how do we balance this moment that we're in right now with and connect to our feelings and really taking care of ourselves and stopping, knowing that like the pressure of how to solve racism can't be just on my shoulders or your shoulders as an individual. The pressures of how to solve, anti-LGBT sentiments can't be just on either of our shoulders. But I am really curious, and I'm going to go one person to one person because we only have like 3 minutes left and I'm going to get everybody in. Tiq, what are your thoughts about this moment in time that we're in right now, summer 2020, Black Lives Matter, COVID-19? How does this moment speak to the past or things that you've seen in the past compared to today? Is it the same? Is it different or a more crucial moment? Is it crucial at all? Do you think that we can take a rest and deal with it the next time it comes around? Or do you think it's like, how does that sit with you?
Yeah, I think, 2020 has been a fight. This entire year, we have been fighting this entire year from Australia burning down in January to where we are right now. This entire year has been a fight, and it calls in for me all the years that we've been fighting. So the years of Stonewall. So we have to remember that, the first Pride was not a parade. It was a protest, and it was a fight, and it was a riot. And I'm feeling that fight right now. And the civil rights movement of the '60s, it was all a fight, and it was violence, and it was fire, and it was heartbreak. All of these, that's what I'm feeling this year. And and to Baset's point, it's hard to carry all of those things, right? I'm in a fight mode right now, and that takes up a lot of energy. So I do think it is really, really important for us to be able to take care of ourselves right now. There's like when you're on an airplane, what they tell you, you got to put on your oxygen mask first. So put your mask on first. Take care of you first before you get out here and try to take care of other people in the community and things like that. And also, to your point, dismantling racism is white people's job, not ours. They built it. They benefit from it. It's their job to fix it.
I agree. So, Basit, let me ask you a question. Like, before we put on our masks, the masks for COVID, but I think Tiq was talking about oxygen masks. Whichever way, before we put on our masks, what is it that you want to say to white folks that are not in the queer community? Just what's your one message?
My one message is to take the labor off of brown folks. We all have the abilities to read a book, to do the research, to ask questions that are not to be answered by Black and brown people, and keeping in mind that Black people right now are experiencing a lot of trauma and have been over so many years of this system that you are benefiting from. So white people, don't put the responsibility on the disenfranchised to do the work for you. You have all of the necessary tools to educate yourself on our experience without asking us. So do that. Do the work. The work is going to feel uncomfortable. The work isn't going to feel easy, and you're going to have to get through it. But that is the only way that we can truly be accountable and disassemble this system that is harming us.
Isis, similar question. What is your message to queer folks, be they white or everyone else? What is your message to the LGBTQ community at large who are not standing at the intersection of Black and queer?
I want to just let all of them know that their voices matter and that they are important. A lot of times we're made to feel, no matter where it intersects, a lot of times we're made to feel like we're not strong enough, or we're not important enough, or we're not worthy enough. And I think that when you put your mind, when you just get focused, and when you're focused, you can make anything happen. And we're worth it. We're worthy of anything that we put our mind to. And yeah.
Tiq, what is your message to Black folks? This is cis Black folks, hetero Black folks, there might be a few messages in there. So hit me.
My message to Black people right now is to take care of ourselves. Take care of ourselves and rest. When you got to fight. But if you need to rest. And allow these white folks who are popping up talking about they're your allies, and they want to call you and tell you they're sorry, and they want to check on you, and they want to donate. Let them do the work. And my people need to rest. We have been doing this for too long. Let them do it now.
Listen, we never even thought that we would be solving any of these problems or issues. And these are obviously issues I think I can probably speak for each of us to say that there's obviously a lot of mixed emotions, like we mentioned in the beginning of the panel. And I think a lot of us are in the theme of intersectionality, really trying to find a space that is safe and that is self-caring, but also effective as public figures, of space that's also effective, because we really want to see the change that is necessary. And I hope that we'll all be around to enjoy some of the spoils of that. But again, the bottom line is the work needs to begin and end with white folks. If you're listening to this, the white folks that are connected to this conversation, if you hear, you've taken the first of probably 25 million steps that you'll have to take, but you've taken the first of many, many steps that you'll have to take. And so we do appreciate everyone for being involved in this conversation. for listening to this conversation, and know that, just like Tiq said, all of our experiences are different. And I think that's the beauty of our communities, both Black and queer. That's the beauty of our intersectional identities. And the most important thing to do is listen and self-care. And then we can do everything else. And I really do want to say thank you to each of our panelists, Tiq Milan, Isis King, and Basit. Thank you so much. My name is Peppermint. To everyone that's watching, make sure that you check in for our next panel that starts in just a little bit. And thank you so much for tuning in to the Black Queer Town Hall. Make sure you go to blackqueertownhall.org to continue to donate, because we want to continue to raise funds, and we want to do this again. This is the first annual. We want this to be another one tomorrow, next week, next year, whatever. But for now, thank you so much for tuning in, and we will see you again. Bye.
Take care, y'all. Bye-bye.